Okay, so I'm going to show a demo on paper folding, paper techniques, and just how to get to know the materiality of paper before we start our three-dimensional projects. So firstly, paper, like wood, which is what paper comes from, has a grain. So this is a piece of factory-made printer paper, and even this, even though it's not a fancy paper, it also has a grain. Typically, papers have grains that are vertical. As I'm presenting the paper to you now, the grain is running up and down. That is what you will typically find with like all paper products. But some do run horizontally. But the way that you can tell is by taking the paper and applying a little bit of pressure as you fold it, but not enough to crease it. As you can see, I'm not creasing it. Just a little bit of pressure. And the easier it is to crease it down, that's usually the way the grain goes. So it's very easy for me to press this down. Now let's take it horizontally. I can show you. It's not going down as easily. Like, it's giving me a lot of resistance, a lot of buoyancy. In your own time, try this with like any paper that you have, and you'll find it to be true. Okay. And so, as you all know, there are different types of paper. There is very like factory-made paper that we use every day, very utilitarian paper, which means I use this in my everyday life, for school, for work, for everything, to jot down a note. This paper is like very easily accessible. And then we have paper that is heavier, a bit heavier. This is a watercolor paper. It's a cold press, I believe, cold press watercolor paper. And it's very thick, as you can see. It has been rolled up, but it's also a very, very thick sheet of paper compared to the printer paper. This is a factory-made paper as well, but it also is more of a special paper. But the same thing, this paper has actually been cut. So because it is not the full sheet of paper, I can't tell whether this is running vertically or horizontally. So I have to check. So let's check. So I'm going to try to push this down. Okay, just I'm getting a feel for it. It's something that you very much have to do on an individual basis, but I am showing you how to do it. Pushing down. Okay, now we're going to switch and do it this way. Oh, okay, that's as much as I can go down with that one. I feel like that's like a very visual representation of it. Okay, so this paper is running this way. This is the way that the paper is running. Okay. And then I also have another sheet of watercolor paper. It's a bit like heavier. It's a bit heavier. It's very much stronger than the other watercolor paper that I was using previously. Also, it's a different color. Paper comes in many different colors, finishes, textures. That's something that you want to think about when you're creating your 3D object. What does the finish of this paper mean? And does making this paper shiny make it more special? Does making this paper more crisp make it more of like a commodity? Like, what does it mean when I am choosing the textures for my paper? So this is a very smooth texture, much like the printer paper, but the last watercolor paper I showed you was a lot rougher, and it's visually a lot rougher as well. So like the watercolor paper, I also cut this paper from a larger sheet, so I do not know which way it's running. So I'm going to try to run it this way first. Just get a feel for it, okay? Now I'm going to try to run it the other way. See, I can't even pull it down. So this paper is running horizontally on this particular sheet of paper. It's running this way. So that is just important to know. Now, it's important to know because when you are folding paper, as I'm sure you know, because I'm sure most of you have probably tried your hand in origami and making cranes and fortune tellers and things, paper folding works and looks a lot better when you have a crisp line. And by folding your paper on the grain, that ensures that your line is going to be crisp, that your paper is going to want to go into that fold, because instinctually the paper doesn't want to. The paper wants to be paper. It wants to lay here. You're manipulating the paper. So if you fold on the grain, it really prefers to fold that way. It doesn't want to, but it prefers to, than folding against its grain. Also, when you're folding paper, having clean hands is very, very important. Obviously, we are humans and we have oils on our hands and sometimes dirt. It's normal. It's not disgusting. It's just the way that it is. So, if you want to go this route, you can wear gloves when you're paper folding. I oftentimes wear gloves when I'm presenting my artwork, or even when I'm presenting my students' artwork, because I don't want to damage it with the oils and dirt from my hands and nails and things. Or you can just make sure that your hands are very, very nicely washed and they're dry before you begin paper folding. It's like the worst thing when you do a perfect fold and you just have like an oil smudge going across the paper. No one likes that. So keep that in mind. It's a very picky thing, but it's a craftsmanship like area that you can see in paper folding very easily, and it can just throw off your whole project. So I'm going to fold this paper vertically on its grain. Because this is a factory made cut sheet of paper, its measurements are pretty on the square side, and by that 90 degrees all around. So I really like to use like a cutting mat when I'm folding papers that I know is very even. And I just like to line up one line of the paper, this line of the paper, with a line on the cutting mat. Because the line on the cutting mat also is made by a factory, and so it's, or by a machine, so it's also correct. So I line this up, and then I take the other side of the paper and I scoot it up. It's very important to be very patient when you're paper folding. I scoot it up till I get to that line and I meet. Okay. Now I'm actually going to fold the paper. This is called a bone folder. This is what I personally use in my practice to fold paper. It is actually not made out of bone. It's probably like a very high grade plastic. It very much feels like bone though. These were originally made out of bone though. And you can still get bone folders that are made out of bone. This is just like a plastic one though. And it's great because the bone folder is not your oily finger. Although it's just as important to keep this clean. But it's not your oily finger. It's sharper than your finger. It has like a finer line than your finger. It's harder than your finger. So it's really going to get a really great crisp cut. So the way you use a bone folder is you're going to lay the paper down without completely folding it, like as much as possible. And then I like to take this side of my bone folder and I just rest it on the paper and stroke the paper like that. And so I'll do it again on this side so you can see me do it. I'm going to use this hand. You'll just rest it like this. Like so. And that's how you use a bone folder. Now, you can also, just to like make sure that the fold is very crisp, you could take the other side of the bone folder and, you know, rub the paper like this. Make sure the fold is perfectly like how you want it to be. So that's what we have. Very nice, very clean cut fold, which is important. You want to be deliberate with your folding, or else the paper kind of falls apart when you're making like too many decisions about like how many times you want to fold. Ideally, you only want to fold once if you're going to make a fold. Now, say you don't want to go out and get a bone folder. They're probably about $7. Sometimes that's too rich for my blood. So let's try to fold with other materials. Sometimes, when I cannot find my bone folder, because I lose things sometimes, I like to use a Sharpie, or this is, you have to be very careful, but also what makes a really great bone folder is this curved part of a scissor. It's really great. It's very hard. It doesn't have that very fine point, nor does the Sharpie, but it's very hard and it's very good. But both of these items, you aren't going to get a mark on your sheet of paper if you're very careful. You could with like a scissor kind of like this, just because it is like a purpley plastic color. But that's okay. Like, that is easily fixable. You can wrap it in like a saran wrap. Same with the Sharpie. And if it strikes you, you can wipe your bone folder in a saran wrap. Okay. So we're going to fold this sheet of paper. I'm going to choose the Sharpie. I would prefer that you all use Sharpie. It's much safer. But when you're at home and your parent is fine with it, feel free to use the head of a scissor, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. Excuse me, the sniffles. So as we discovered with this sheet of paper, which way was it running? Right, it was running horizontally. So even though this is a swatch of paper, I'm still going to kind of try to line it up as best I can with the line on this cutting mat. This is a tip I learned when I was in a bookmaking class in college. Those things are all paper, and you have to fold the papers correctly. And so you just really want to take your time and look at the edges and make sure you're lining them up correctly how you want. No rush. Well, make sure you're working at an efficient time and speed, so there is no rush. But so you're going to line that up. Now, you're going to use the Sharpie much like the bone folder. I like to use this end of the Sharpie because there's less maybe like room for error from using the tip. Yeah, sometimes, you know, you're not looking at what you're doing when you put your Sharpie on, and also this is a plastic color, so it could like smear off, and you don't want that. So I like to go with like the gray side of the Sharpie. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to roll the paper on this bit of the Sharpie. So we're going to press down. Now this is a thicker paper too, so when you fold, you really have to fold it with intention and kind of hard. And we're going to slide across very firmly, very deliberately. Okay, we'll do it again on the other side so you can see. And I am really folding down hard right now. A lot of pressure. So this is folded once. And because this is a very thick watercolor paper, I do like to go over several times with the Sharpie. Just back and forth. Fold it over. On the other side you do it. The cleaner and more deliberate the fold, I'll say this over and over and over again. You probably are so sick of hearing it, but the cleaner and more deliberate the fold, the better your paper folding will be. That's a great fold right there. And depending on like which direction you want your paper to go in, you can take the paper and fold it the other direction and bone fold again. This is if you're going for just a very crisp, clean separation of the two parts of the paper. I would recommend doing this. But if you're going more for a construction aspect where you want a little bit more resistance on the inside, where you didn't fold it with a bone, or you didn't fold it with a Sharpie or a scissor, that is what I would do. I would just like leave it. So yeah, so it wants to fold in both directions. You have to kind of make it do what you want, but also work with it. It's nature at the same time. Now with the scissor, these scissors are interesting. I have a little divot here, but what I like to do is use like the most curved part of the scissor. And I'm not holding it by the blade. I would just like to note that I like to use like a big scissor so I don't have to hold it by the blade. I'm just holding the handle. No blade touching. And I'm being very careful. And I'm taking the scissor and I am very firmly rubbing it against the paper. The benefit to the scissor over the Sharpie is you get like a lot more pressure down on the paper, and I don't have to put that much resistance or put that much muscle into it. Sharpie, you need a little bit more elbow grease to do the same job, but yeah, you just go across. It makes a very nice, very, very nice fold. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to folding paper and attaching paper. I'm sure all of you aren't going to work from a huge sheet of paper and just continually keep folding that one sheet of paper and not make any cuts and not make any like adjustments. But I'm sure some of you are going to glue paper together. At all means, please, 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 please do not use tape. Please don't use tape. It never looks good. If you're going to attach paper, please use like a liquid glue. You could just like use like an Elmer's glue, or you can use get some glue. It's called PVA. It's an archival glue. And archival means it's meant to last a very long time. So if you want your project to have some longevity and you want the glue to like really stick, PVA is great. And it's a water-based glue. It's water soluble. Don't worry, it's not like a super glue. It's not that crazy, but it can be that strong, and that and it won't turn color like Elmer's glue. If you look at some of the projects you made, maybe when you were in kindergarten, that you used white Elmer's glue. It's probably a very like ambery yellow by now, because Elmer's glue turns because it's not like particularly archival. But if it's not archival, that's okay. If you glue it correctly, it won't matter too much. Now, because I have white paper with me today, I'm going to actually show you how to glue paper on the actual cutting mat, because I think it will be clearer to see. So I'm going to use Elmer's glue. And if you've ever glued wood together, paper is very similar. When you're gluing wood together, you want to get like a real nice bead of glue. Just real like nice, thick, consistent. So a real nice, thick, consistent thing of glue. Just going to go across. And then what I like to do is take my finger. Now this is what will be on the edge of your paper, on your paper when you're attaching it to another sheet of paper. A nice thick bead like this of glue. What I like to do is take my finger, like you would with wood, and I like to gently just go across like this. Like that. And that's the amount of glue that you want on your paper. It's probably like the consistency of like how much glaze is on a Krispy Kreme donut. Like that's what you want it to look like before you glue it. So not like crazy, not like too much, but like also get some glue on there, like really get it to stick. So that's that, if you can see that. So that pretty much wraps up my demo on paper techniques and paper folding techniques and knowing the materiality of paper. Thank you.